So we're on the National Geographic tour of the symptoms of depression. And I've said that there are 9 symptoms in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual diagnostic criteria, which are divided into 2 parts. To get the diagnosis, a person has to meet criteria for at least one of the first 2 symptoms. And I covered the first one, which was, surprise, surprise, low mood. Now let's consider the second, anhedonia. And just like low mood, it has to be present most of the day, nearly every day, for at least 2 weeks. The term comes from the Greek, or an, meaning without, kind of like atypical, not typical, and hedon, which means pleasure. So people hear about anhedonia, without pleasure, and think, well, this sounds like just another way of saying low mood. Isn't it the same thing? Answer? No, it isn't. Anhedonia is not just low mood. It is a disconnection between activity and elevations in mood. Normally, if we do something we usually like, our mood lifts. We play cards with our friends, and we have fun. We have a nice meal, and we enjoy it. We get out into the wilderness, and we feel a sense of connection with the world. And the constellation of things that move you and the way that they move you is unique to you. But you do some of these things, and it shifts your mood. If you have anhedonia, it doesn't work. You go out kayaking, and you might as well be at the dentist. It makes no difference. Nothing gives you pleasure. So what do people do? Well, what's the point of getting the kayak out if you're not going to like it? It doesn't feed the kids. It doesn't earn you money. The only point is to get some enjoyment. And if you don't, well, why do it? So a person with anhedonia tends to give up everything they used to like doing. And what do they do instead? Often, not much. There's nothing pulling them forward. You know, hey, if I do this, I'll like it. So it's hard to do anything. I've mentioned the idea of depressive spirals. Anhedonia is a major contributor here. We have a cluster of factors that initiate the depression. The depression includes anhedonia. The anhedonia makes people give up the things that used to sustain them, so they have a life that most people would find dull and depressing. This makes the depression worse, and the anhedonia intensifies. If you think of enjoyment as the color in life, anhedonia pulls that color away, making everything look dull and gray and drab and unappealing. Now in the DSM, anhedonia gets a bit confused because they blend 2 distinct phenomena in a pretty innocent sounding way. They say it's a loss of interest or pleasure in daily activities. Interest or pleasure. They sound the same, but they're not. First, doing things that used to give a person pleasure no longer does so. This is what I've been talking about, and it is the classic meaning of anhedonia. So you engage in the behavior, and anhedonia is about what happens next. If there's no upward emotional response, we call that anhedonia. But the second part is interest. This is completely different. This is about what happens before you play cards or go kayaking. You think about it, you imagine it, and this fails to produce any kind of longing to do it. The actual behavior isn't part of the picture. It's about maybe doing it in the near future. It's interest, and the interest isn't there, so the problem probably never gets in the boat. Well, okay, so that sounds a bit picky, doesn't it? Next, I'll be arguing about how many angels dance on the head of a pin. Who cares? Well, it makes a difference because these are two separate phenomena and they can change somewhat independently of each other. Now, we're in the midst of a discussion of the various symptoms of depression. When people get better from depression, all of those symptoms don't improve at the same time. It's like a cold. If you're like most people, the sore throat starts to go away, but you're still coughing and you still have a runny nose. Eventually, the runny nose ends, but some of us are left with a cough for another couple of days. In depression, these two phenomena both tend to happen. No pleasure during when you do something, and no interest in doing it beforehand. And they can develop at the same time or at different times as the depression gets worse. But more importantly, as the depression gets better, they go away at different times. In most cases, in my experience, people develop the ability to enjoy something while it's happening. So they go to a movie, and for the duration of that movie, they're fine. They like it, they're engaged by the story, and they can feel more or less normal. The movie ends, they go home, the door closes behind them, and they're as depressed as ever. But while they were water skiing or gardening or talking with a friend, they were okay. The pleasure part, that present-oriented part, is pretty much back to normal. And for me, this is an early warning sign that the depression is starting to lift. But what about the interest? In my experience, that lags behind. So if we can get that person into a kayak, they're about the same as they used to be. That part of the anhedonia has lifted. But if you ask them if they'd be interested in kayaking later today, it doesn't charge them up. It may just feel overwhelming. Oh, I just have to get over there and get into all that gear and drag the boat into the water and then paddle and paddle and paddle in a circle for nothing. No, I don't want to. So the pleasure may have come back, but not the interest. The problem is, what gets a person to start doing something is usually that anticipation, that interest. And without it, they may not get going to the card game or the bike ride or the hike in the woods. And they may never discover, as a result, that their ability to feel pleasure has snuck back in. It's come back. So how do we deal with that in therapy? I work with people to identify the things they used to enjoy before they got depressed. And granted, some of this may not be the greatest idea. For some people, it's like getting drunk. That would be great. Other stuff might not be available at the moment, like touring Italy. We look for things that are relatively easy to arrange and that the person can do a little bit. Maybe they like 7-day backcountry camping trips. Lovely. But we can get them to do a 15-minute walk in the park. We need something that they can get themselves to do without feeling that interest or enthusiasm. So even if I don't feel like it, I can get myself to ride my bike around the block. We need something that they can do through sheer force of will. And during depression, that will is pretty weak. So it has to be easy. And then we make the goal be to do the thing, not to get the pleasure that they normally would. So the point is to swim one lap of the pool. It's not to like it. It's not to have fun. It's not to feel really good about yourself. It's just to do it. We need to release all expectation of enjoyment because the first time they do it, it probably won't be fun. And the next time, it'll only feel a little fun. If they're expecting it to feel like it used to, they're going to be disappointed. Paddle, paddle, paddle. This is stupid. Then it will feel okay. Then it'll feel a little fun, but nothing like it used to. And gradually that enjoyment will come back in. So the diagnostic manual takes those two symptoms, loss of pleasure and loss of interest, and it rolls them together as if they were one thing. But they're not. If a person has anhedonia, and most people with true depression do, the pleasure from doing things will come back first, and then the interest in doing them. But if they wait around for the desire, the temptation to do those things, if they wait for that to show up, it's not going to come. And they'll never realize that the ability to enjoy things has already returned. I have an online course on self-care for depression. There's a link below. Not a substitute, though, for care by a qualified healthcare professional.